We can start, sir.
Okay, so let me begin with this lecture, which is going to be the sort of closing lecture of the wave mechanical formalism of quantum mechanics. After some introduction, I'll give you the interpretative postulates of quantum mechanics. And also there's an important topic of commuting operators. So this particular topic is somewhat long, so that will engage our attention for most of the lecture. And then of course references and acknowledgement, etc. So what have we done so far? We have interpreted psi mod square and phi p t mod square as respectively probability density at R and P, where these are Fourier transforms of each other. That's what we did in lecture 3. And I think all of you have probably understood it quite well. And so this was the question number 1, if you recall my 3 questions. So this was the question number 1. How do you interpret psi? And in the process, we also got phi. Then we did some discussion about the time dependence, Schrodinger equation. In the last 2 lectures, we did as a special case when potential does not depend on time. It admits of stationary solution of this kind, and where UR satisfies the time independent Schrodinger equation. And I think in the last 2 lectures, because of its great importance, we solved it for several problems for one-dimensional case, because that case brings out the quantum features besides being simple to handle. However, the main question still remains unanswered. The 3rd question, if you recall, how to extract information about any observable from the given state. Not just, we have answered what R and P, but what about other physical observables? In 3 dimensions, there will be physical observables like angular momentum or kinetic energy or whatever, or there will be some additional other operators. So how to extract information about these? That is the question we are going to answer in this lecture, and that is going to complete, because with that question answered, the wave mechanical formalism will get over. So the formalism that we are going to describe gives you a clear way, and the formalism can be spelled out in terms of a few interpretative postulates. I'm going to give the wave mechanical version of the formalism and restrict to one particle non-relativistic system. But the formalism is very general, as I have been saying many times. It is easily generalized to many particle non-relativistic systems. However, its treatment of intrinsic spin is somewhat ad hoc. Ad hoc means not very systematic. It doesn't follow from a clear cut from a theory. You sort of graft onto the wave mechanics intrinsic spin theory. But more important, it cannot be readily generalized to the relativistic domain, because our entire thing is, we are talking of single particle or many particles, but then the number is fixed. But in relativistic domain, the particle number is not conserved. So this, our wave mechanical formalism that we are talking of, breaks down there. And then we have to go for the abstract formalism of quantum mechanics that we are going to do in the 9th lecture, L9, which besides being very mathematically nice, it can properly handle intrinsic spin as well as the relativistic quantum mechanics, which is called quantum field theory. So let's begin with interpretative postulates of quantum mechanics. The zeroth postulate is just for completeness, you know it already. We have said that the wave function is the complete description at each instant, and it contains all that information that is possible in quantum mechanics. We know that it doesn't have exact information, it has probabilistic information, but whatever is possible, psi contains that information. And so this postulate is consistent with time dependent Schrodinger equation. If in time it is first order, so mathematics tells you that psi of R T naught, if you know, psi at later times. If it was second order in time, this statement could not have been made. In other words, given psi of RT naught, psi of RT, and hence probabilistic information on all observables is determined in principle. Of course, these statements are principal statements. In practice, it may be hard to solve the equation analytically. You may have to go to computation solution, etc. Those are practical matters. But as a matter of principle, the equation gives you psi RT at all times. So that is summary of what we did already. But now we begin with the postulates. There are three postulates, and before I go ahead and tell you, I must caution you that this numbering is not something universal, that all books will say postulate 1 is this and postulate 2 is this. This is what something I am doing based on some books, and my own numbering may be somewhat different from others. There is nothing universal about numbering. Of course, postulates are universal, but numbering is not universal. So it is different from how we talk about Newton's first law of motion, second law of motion, or thermodynamics, first law of thermodynamics. That numbering is. So if I say somebody to some other physicist, second law of motion or second law of thermodynamics, that physicists will understand. But if I say postulate 2 of quantum mechanics, she'll have to ask, what do you mean? Which postulate are you talking about? Or what are you talking about? So that's the point. But the content, whatever I'm saying, is of course all there in every physics book. So postulate 1 is to each physical observable is associated a linear Hermitian operator. So I made some mathematical terms, linear Hermitian, so I must explain what it is. An operator is linear if this equation is satisfied. That is A on C1 psi1 plus C2 psi2. It just takes away C1 outside, and A operates on psi1 and A operates on psi2, just summation. So that is the meaning of linearity of an operator. For example, derivative of a derivative function obviously satisfies this. We have learned in calculus that d by dx f plus g is df by dx plus dt by dx. So that's linearity. Remember here C1, C2 are complex, any are constant in psi1, psi2 or any always, I mean, in quantum mechanics, we deal with square integral functions. So within that constraint, it's anything you like. But Hermitian is a more technical property. And before I tell you Hermitian operators property, I should remind you that you may have learned already in matrix theory what one means by Hermitian conjugate, or sometimes people call that adjoint in mathematics. In matrix, it is a very simple thing. What is the meaning of adjoint or Hermitian conjugate? Just transpose the matrix and take complex conjugate. So I'm sure you have heard of this before, or even if you have not heard of it, you can easily understand that matrix wise, it is such a simple thing. Just take transpose of the matrix and take complex conjugate. That is the meaning of Hermitian conjugate of a matrix. But what is the meaning of Hermitian conjugate of an operator? That I'm going to tell you now. Of course, later in the next few lectures, you will know why I'm using the same term, because each operator has a matrix, and I will come to about that when something is Hermitian conjugate of an operator, actually there it will mean the usual Hermitian conjugate of a matrix. So that's why we are using the same term, Hermitian conjugate. But operator, when you operator, it's not very clear immediately what you mean by complex. It's not clear. So you have to give a clear definition. And this is the clear definition which you must commit to heart. I mean, you must memorize. No harm in memorizing the most important definition, because if you make a mistake, then it's very basically wrong. So if it is A here, psi1 here, you see A may be a differential operator. If it is just multiplicative operator, it's fine. Doesn't matter whether you put. But differential operator, you have to be very careful on what you are differentiating. So here A psi 1. It's not obvious that I can take it here. If I take it onto this side, then it becomes some other operator, and that operator is called A dagger. So this is the definition of A dagger, where once again, this is not for any particular functions. Psi1, psi2 are arbitrary wave functions. And if an operator is Hermitian, we mean A is A dagger. So it's as simple as this. So what is the defining equation of a Hermitian operator? The defining equation, just put A dagger equal to A here. So defining equation will be A psi 1 psi 2 is equal to A psi 2. One of the most important definitions in quantum mechanics of, I mean, this you must know, is absolutely basic to all of quantum mechanics, the definition of a Hermitian operator. Because as we said, all physical observables are associated with linear Hermitian operators. So meaning of Hermitian has to be absolutely clear. And it is just this that what it means and nothing else. Where psi1 and psi2 are arbitrary functions. Now, instead of talking in very general terms, it is best to fix attention to some 6-7 common observable operators that one comes across. We don't need to be absolutely general because it's unnecessary. We always talk of only these operators in quantum. So here is a table which you should inspect and sort of know it very well. That position operator in coordinate space, these are coordinate space operators. Position operator is R, any function potential energy is V of R, momentum operator is P equal to minus IH plus. This is given to you. It was suggested by in some earlier lectures, but now I'm saying quantum mechanics says the operator associated with P is minus IH cross gradient. And then once you remember this, most of the things you don't need to remember, because kinetic energy, you have classical relation, it becomes just take P squared, then it becomes minus H bar squared Pm, and gradient dot gradient is what is called Laplacian operator, del square. Total energy is this kinetic energy operator plus potential energy operator. What is orbital angular momentum? L is R cross P. In classical physics, it becomes this. So it's really very, very simple. All that you have to remember in coordinate space, remember coordinate space, P is minus I cross gradient. You may take it as just given to you, or you may go through earlier lectures when we found out expectation values from momentum space, etc. This operator came up there. So you may think that it has not just fallen from the sky, but you just take it as an operator given in quantum mechanics for momentum. This is the operator that works. And there's yet another operator called parity operator, which cannot be expressed sort of standalone. It's very difficult to express it standalone. It is better to express it on what it does to a wave function. These operators, by the way, have no meaning except when they operate on some wave function. So when we say P is this, what we mean is P on psi is minus IH cross gradient psi, where psi is any function. So similarly, parity operator is P on psi, where psi is any arbitrary function allowed in quantum mechanics. And there is yet another operator which we have to introduce despite its mysterious nature, and that is intrinsic spin angular momentum operator. And the difficulty with this operator is we are saying angular momentum, something like this, but whereas the orbital angular momentum is clearly expressed in terms of R and P, as can never be expressed in terms of R. And yet it is an angular momentum. It's a mystery, part of which I'll clarify as we go along, but it's a subtle thing. It's kind of deeper aspect of quantum mechanics. There exists a spin angular momentum S, which cannot be expressed in terms of P. We'll come to that, and much of the mystery will get resolved when we come to this. It's lecture 11, I think, on orbital angular momentum spin. Okay, so just to know what are not allowed, it's sometimes good to know what is not allowed so that we know what is allowed. Otherwise, we may take it something trivial. It's not so. For example, an operator, we may define an operator which squares the function. This is not a linear operator. For the simple reason that psi1 plus psi2 whole square, we have learned in long time in our school that a plus b whole square is not a square plus b square. It is an additional term. So similarly, a of psi1 plus psi2 will be psi1 plus psi2 whole square, which is not psi1 square plus psi2 square. So this is not a linear operator. There's another thing called anti-linear operator, which doesn't do this, but just complex conjugates. So it does this to the function, just complex conjugate. So we therefore, C1 doesn't come out clean, it comes out with a complex conjugate, and A psi1 is psi1 star, A psi2 is psi2 star. This operator I'm giving, if you ever do later, not in this course, but if you do a thing called time reversal symmetry, time reversal operation, it is only in that context that this operator plays a very important role, this kind of operator. We are not going to do that, so we do not bother too much about it. Just be aware that there exists one place where antilinear operator is this. And as far as time is concerned, it is not an operator. I have told you many times. In that table, what I gave earlier, there was no time. It was position, momentum, but there's no time. Time is just a parameter. So that is about the first postulate. Now, most of it you should be able to do yourself, but since to some, I'm sure it's not new to you because you have done quantum mechanics. But how to go about proving something is a Hermitian operator. I have left it to you, but just one thing on simpler case. I mean, I'll take the teacher's liberty to use a simple thing in class and leave the difficult things to students to do themselves. So that's what I'm going to do. So very simple, psi2 star minus I cross del dr. I have to prove. Please remember the definition of hermeticity. What is the definition of hermeticity? That whole operator goes here, but it goes and then as a whole it gets complex conjugate. Do not do the mistake of saying minus I cross del psi2 star. No, it is whole. If you made that mistake, then you'll make an error of sign. So please remember this. So we need to prove this. Very simple, as I said. It's just two steps. It's dq bar, we are talking about del by dx, just do this integration and just use integration by parts. By the way, you must have already seen in various places in your courses and the tutorials that some people are doing, that integration by parts is a very, very common, it's very common in quantum mechanics to prove various things. So learn it properly. Minus first function into integral of second minus differential coefficient of the first into integral of second. So this integration by parts also, the rule should be learned by heart, should be committed to memory, because it comes too many times. You can't keep looking at books. And since the wave functions vanish at infinity, all good wave functions vanish at infinity, this term is zero. So you pick up a minus sign and then you put this and this becomes this. That's all. It's a one-line proof. So left-hand side becomes plus IH cross, which is this minus IH cross whole square. So in the same way, you please check all the other operators. Supposing you want to check delta 2 by del x square, so do integration by parts 2 times and so on. And there'll be other ways also how you can check that some operator is Hermitian. But this is the simplest direct way of checking that some wave mechanical operator is Hermitian. So now let's consider, before we go to postulate 2, the properties. Now once again, as I said last time, I'm going to repeat things which I say a number of times because of their great importance. So properties of linear Hermitian operators are the same that I told you yesterday about the Hamiltonian operator, yesterday or day before perhaps. The Hermitian operator Hamiltonian. Hamiltonian is a Hermitian operator, and all Hermitian operators satisfy the properties that you already know for Hamiltonian. What were those properties? Consider the eigenvalue equation. Now just once again, this what I said. A in general will take a function psi r to some other function, so say eta r. In an eigenvalue equation, A ER simply takes to just a constant lambda times the same function. That means the often error committed by people thinking that this is an equation for every function. That's not true. This is an equation waiting to be solved. As I say, it's a differential equation which you have to solve. It's not, nobody's telling you that A is on every function is giving you lambda. No, that would be ridiculous. It's an equation in which you have to solve E. And so that's why it is called an eigenvalue equation. And solving an eigenvalue, we saw just like for Hamiltonian, it will give you a spectrum of values. Now you even saw it in examples, so I don't think anything is new to you. So wherein n is an index to specify the eigenvalue. For harmonic oscillator, ran to infinite number of values. For square wave, it's not infinite number of values, it is a few values that you can get. So depends, it may be finite or discrete finite. If it's a bound state, it will have to be discrete, etc. It's for Hamiltonian operator. But we are talking about general law. However, this expression suggests that for a given lambda, there is just one linearly independent eigenfunction. So the same point, if En is an eigenfunction, so is Cen, where C is an arbitrary constant with the same eigenvalue. If you put C here, you see your eigenvalue remains the same. So, but this is not linearly independent of En. So it is not a degenerate situation. But as we saw for Hamiltonian, for a given eigenvalue, it can correspond to M. So I think it's a good revision of what we already said. All these things we have already said. And they're so important that no harm in repeating again and again. And so we need an extra index to denote degeneracy. Don't put S here. It will be a big error if you put S here. Here it is only one index. It's the wave functions, the eigenfunctions, which are carrying the index. That is what shows that for a given lambda, for a given n, there are many S. That is the meaning of degeneracy. Note that in our index notation, yeah, just one additional point, which we did not mention earlier. We are giving, when we write like this subscript, usually by convention, we mean it's a discrete thing. But we have seen that eigenvalues need not be discrete. For scattering state, they are infinite. So to show that, if you want to say it's not discrete, it's continuous, it's often a convention to write it as an argument. It's not necessary. You may put lambda here and say, lambda is continuous. But to show that this is discrete, this is continuous, it is often a good convention to write lambda in the argument itself. Not that it is necessary, but it is convenient to distinguish. And what are the three important properties? Now I want to ask you in chat, anticipate, the properties of H. So, and I am giving you the answer. The properties are there for every linear Hermitian operator. What are the properties? Three important properties. Chat, first property, please.
Real eigenvalues, many people are saying.
No, now please make statements, complete statement. Just don't say, yeah, eigenvalues of a linear Hermitian operator are always real. That's the first. Okay.
Okay.
Lambda n are real. And sorry, I gave the answer. I'm sorry. Eigenfunctions for distinct eigenvalues are orthogonal.
Yeah, somebody also wrote that in parallel.
Good. So, yeah. But note here now, last time I did not write, degeneracy complication. I was avoiding in the orthogonality condition. What are you seeing here? As long as M is not equal to N, one does not care which eigenfunction one is talking, which degenerate eigenfunction. It may be S and S. I'm not saying S dash is the same thing as S. And I'm saying M is not equal to N, then it has to be 0. So distinct eigenvalues must be orthogonal, where orthogonality means this integral is 0. Okay, what is the third property? And if I think, yeah, I don't know if the next step is giving you the answer. Yeah,
A
no,
linear arbitrary function can be written as linear combination of eigenvectors. So eigenfunctions are complete.
Eigenfunctions are
Complete.
That is the third property.
Yes.
Great, great. So I'm so happy you know all the things that I'm saying. Really don't need this lecture. But it will be a revision for you. So the M degenerate eigenfunctions for a given eigenvalue are not necessarily mutually orthogonal. So if I take M equal to N, then of course it is not 0. But is it 0 if S dash is different from S? Give the answer. I take M equal to N and S dash not equal to S. Is it 0? Yes or no? Did you follow the question? Forget this equation. Just put M equal to N and S dash not equal to S. What's the answer?
So people are saying no. Need not be 0.
Don't say no, need not be.
Yeah.
There's a difference between no and need not be. Correct? It need not be. I mean, the way you may have chosen degenerate eigenfunctions, they may well not be. But they can always be made. You remember the statement, by linear combinations, they can always be made. But it is always possible to choose MDB. So I think all of you have got the points, and therefore we can write this. So then normalizing each eigenfunction, which is always possible, we have the nice orthogonal relation where S dash not equal to S is 0. So that is by construction. This is by Hermiticity property. You understand? This Kronecker delta is because of the Hermiticity property. This Kronecker delta is because of the fact, the possibility that it is always possible, the constructibility possibility, you may say, that even if it were not in the beginning choice, we can make such combinations. So this is always possible. And the third property you already anticipated, the set of eigenfunctions of a linear Hermitian observer is complete. And we choose for convenience the orthonormal set of eigenfunctions. So why make life complicated? Why, I mean, if it's possible. So in general, unless there is a special need, we always, even degenerate eigenfunctions, it's much convenient to consider them to construct orthonormal sets. So orthogonal sets. So set of eigenfunctions linear are complete. We choose for convenience the orthonormal set of eigenfunctions. So these functions which are now orthonormal, this we will always choose. Now what does this mean? It's complete. It completes means given in any arbitrary wave function, not particular wave function. This equation is always possible. There are many issues of convergence, etc. If you go to a mathematician, he'll or she will talk about in what sense it's converging with an infinite sum, etc. etc. We won't bother about this, at least in this lecture. Next lecture we may talk about it. With using the orthonormality property, what is a big use of orthonormality? You can easily invert exactly for the same reason as A equal to AX I unit vector plus AY J unit vector plus AX Z K unit vector. You can write AY is equal to J unit vector dot A because it's an orthonormal set. Exactly the same reason. CNS becomes En star S. There in ordinary real vector algebra, there is no complex conjugation. Here it is a complex conjugation. Why has it to be a complex conjugation? Because the orthogonality property is one complex conjugate, one not complex conjugate. So that's why it comes this way. But please go from this step to this step at home yourself. It will be important to go yourself. It is kind of obvious to anybody who has practiced with it, but it needs one effort to invert it this way. Putting this back in the expansion, we get the completeness relation. You put this back in the expansion. Okay, and you will get this. Now you tell me a mathematical point. If I put this here, should I continue to write it as R, or will it be correct to keep writing it as R and take E inside? Yes or no? Have you understood the question? I put this expression here. So I am reading out orally. I have not written on the slide. Psi of RT is equal to E star integral E star of NS R psi RT d cube R into ENS R. Then in the integral inside, can I take ENS R? Yes or no? What are the people saying?
No, sir. The reply is no.
No. Why not? Why no?
Okay, they have not mentioned anything apart from writing no.
How? So what will you do? No. So what is a yes? I mean, what should we do to give a response? Yes.
Okay, so there is one answer in words because we have to introduce a new dummy variable.
Excellent, excellent. So that's what I'm coming to. So what you have to understand the meaning of dummy and not dummy variable. In this is not a dummy variable, and R and this variable must match. R and here, T here must match. If you write R here and R dash here, it will not make sense. Here, when I write this R is a dummy variable. It doesn't matter. I can call it R dash. It doesn't matter. It's an integration. It's a indefinite integration. I'm sorry, definite integration. Sorry, definite integration all over space. When there is a definite integral, how does it matter what you call? So this R is R dash. You have to put it R dash because you never meant this R to be the same as this R. Why are you? This is something different. So in order, if you are putting here in this equation separately, no harm in saying the same way. But when you want to mix the two things, you must change the variable to R dash. Same. And then take ENS R inside, then you will be easily able to prove that this will be Kronecker delta. Just use the property that it will be psi R dash T, after change of dummy variable. But psi R dash T has to become after integration psi R T. What should be this quantity? Kronecker delta. So this is a simple mathematics of Kronecker delta and dummy and non-dummy variables.
Sir, sorry to interrupt you. There is a question when somebody is asking what is a dummy variable?
Dummy variable means whose name can be, whose symbol can be changed. Dummy variable is just a word that it means the name of the variable can change. Here the name or symbol is R, I call it R dash. I call it R double dash, it doesn't matter. Because it's going to give me the same value CNS. Because it is definite integral. If it was an indefinite integral, indefinite integral of sine x, cos x is sine x. We don't say it's a dummy variable. But if I would say integral of cos x from 0 to 1, then I might is such and such. Then I might as well say cos x dash dx dash from 0 to 1 is such and such. There will not be difference in the value, obviously. So that is called dummy variable. It's just a name. We can call it if you don't like the name dummy, you can call it integration variable or summation variable. You can call it that. But it's a very common thing to say dummy variable.
Sir, there is a related comment. How can we change it?
Because it's the symbol that we give is immaterial, just immaterial. The symbol we give to it is immaterial for this quantity because it is going from minus infinity to infinity in all directions. So is it anything wrong to say equal to E star NS R dash psi R dash T dr dash? You must understand this point because all these steps depend on your understanding. So no harm in spending 1 minute on this point. This is equal to ENS star R dash psi of R dash T dr dash. Or why RR dash? I can call anything you like. I can call it P, Q, whatever you want. It should be vector only. That's a P vector, Q vector, whatever you want to call it. Now positions, you don't call by P, you usually call by R. You can call it capital R if you wish. Does not matter, provided you put everywhere the same thing. Don't put R dash here and keep R here. No, you're changing the name of the variable, change it consistently. It is being integrated from, it's a definite integral. Please understand the meaning of definite integral, indefinite. Indefinite integral, you write cos x, integral cos x is sine x. There you should not say integral of cos x dash is equal to sine x. It will be a nonsense. Integral of cos x dash equal to sine, then you should say sine x dash. But if you are writing cos x dx from 0 to 1, it is equal to cos of x dash dx dash 0 to 1. If you are not understood, just think about it for a minute. It's a simple point. I'm sure you'll all understand it very, very easily. So let me go ahead because of the lack of time. So properties 1 and 2 are easy to prove. You know the one. And we are going to prove it in the next lecture. Property 3, I yesterday said, is beyond. I mean, it needs high level mathematical proof, which is beyond physics. So we just take it for granted. Property 3 of completeness, and go ahead and exploit it. Of course, we exploit it. Even if we have left the proof to mathematicians, it is hugely exploited in physics. So it's a very important. So postulate 2. Now with this background, let's quickly go to postulate 2. The eigenvalues of linear Hermitian operator are the only possible results of measurement. So now we have seen postulate 1, any observable is associated with linear. Now you all understand the meaning of eigenvalues, you know it very well. There now comes the basic physics point. So I told you once that understand where is the maths and where is the physics. This is now physics. That the eigenvalues of the operator are what you are going to see in a lab on the measurement of that observable. It's the most important, one of the most important postulates of quantum mechanics. And so you can make a postulate, but if it is inconsistent or something absurd right in the beginning, then your theory is not good. I mean, theory has to be rejected. What you say must make mathematical sense. But we just proved linear Hermitian operators eigenvalues are real. So at least you can't say this postulate is wrong. If the values were not real, then you could have thrown away this postulate. Now you see why we are associating every operator with every observable with linear Hermitian operator, because of the reality property of eigenvalues, and because we have our postulatory framework says measurement always gives you this. Now some people say, how do you know? I mean, where does this postulate come from? The answer is it came roundabout way through the work of very brilliant people like Born, Jordan, etc., through roundabout, confusing ways. It was not as straightforward as I'm putting it. It came about through various circuitous paths, but now that is what it is. So unless you want to go through that very tortuous history, you just take it as a postulate. For this postulate to make sense, these eigenvalues must be real. So this is guaranteed by property. I wanted to see the postulate 2's content again. It is not saying only an eigenfunction. When a state is an eigenfunction, then it gives you a measurement to be an eigenvalue of this. No. It says it may be in any state, but measurement will give me only the eigenvalue. It's an amazing postulate. It says that in any arbitrary state, not necessarily an eigenfunction of A, measurement of A will yield a value that must belong to this set. This looks crazy, but this is the way it is. That any function, and it will not look crazy the moment I go to the third postulate. So, but already there is a quantization. If lambda n is a discrete set, measured values of A will never be any value in between lambda n's, a highly non-classical feature. So for example, if you are talking of Hamiltonian or say angular momentum, we'll find angular momentum, its eigenvalues are always discrete, they are not continuous. So angular momentum measurement, no matter what state is there in quantum mechanics, the measured values will have to be one of the discrete set. It will not be anything else. It's a very profound basic postulate of quantum mechanics. But now you will come to this. I'm saying any state it will be this. How can this be that in any state it will give you this? So that is the third postulate says. Yeah, before I go ahead to third postulate, we have done this just a revision. Operators having discrete eigenvalues. Just see Hamiltonian for bound state we have done. Parity operator we'll do sometime. It has only two eigenvalues, +1 or 1. We have done it not formally. We saw sometimes the eigenfunctions are odd or even. So parity has only two eigenvalues. The even eigenfunction plus or minus 1. Even functions have +1 eigenvalue. Odd functions have minus. So parity operator has two eigenvalues, but a large number of eigenfunctions for the same eigenvalue. Orbital angular momentum intrinsic spin, we are going to see. We have to prove this point. We'll prove it in lecture 11. Operators having continuous eigenvalue, position, momentum, Hamiltonian for scattering. And we have done all this, just a revision. Hamiltonian of harmonic state, only bound state. Hamiltonian of a repulsive potential, only scattering state. But in general, Hamiltonian of an attractive potential, for example, electron nucleus potential, say Coulomb potential, has both bound states and scattering states. When this same happens, then this Hamiltonian is its eigenspectrum is partly discrete for bound state and partly continuous. So if you want to say its whole eigenspectrum of Hamiltonian of a Coulomb potential, then what's the answer? The answer is it's partly discrete, partly continuous. So that's their answer for this. Anyway, now we go to the postulate. Yeah, I'm talking about the eigenvalues and eigenfunctions, and then I will come to postulate 3. So we have to practice these eigenvalues and eigenfunctions of various operators. Position operator, what is its? What is a spectrum? Is it continuous? Yes, it is continuous. What is the eigenfunction? Delta function. Why? Because x into delta x minus x naught will be x naught delta function. Delta function usually should not be used just as standalone. It should be used in an integration. But with all those reservations, the answer is this, that for 3-dimensional R, it will be a 3-dimensional delta function. R will give you R naught into this. R is the operator. This is the eigenfunction. This is the eigenvalue. Same. This is the same eigenvalue. Operator, something, eigenvalue, that same thing. So this is an eigenvalue equation of position operator. What is the orthonormality? What does it mean? Take two values, R1, R2. This R0 was the eigenvalue here. So now take R1, R2, integrate. It should be 0 when R1 is not equal to R. And it is delta function. The same reservations. It is not normalizable. When it is the same, it is not normalizable. It has some problems, but we have already accepted. What is the closure property? Closure property is you integrate our eigenvalues and take different functions, but integrate or sum over eigenvalues, and you will get this. So I hope it's clear what is orthonormality, what is closure. Just see closure here. What are we doing here? Closure is summation over eigenvalues. And what is orthogonality? Orthogonality is integration over the function. The argument is the same. These are different. And what is closure? Closure, arguments are different. Eigenvalues are being summed over. So with a little practice, you will know all this very well. So this is eigenvalues are different, same argument, same variable, integrate. Here, coordinates are, I mean, these arguments are different, eigenvalue is the same, sum it over all the eigenvalues. So it's similar looking. Let's go to position. Momentum. Momentum has a very simple solution. This minus I h cross gradient, e to the power ikr, h cross k, e to the power. Again with reservations, which you don't bother too much. They have been fixed by mathematicians. E to the power ikr, just like its counterpart, delta function. After all, it's the Fourier transform of delta function. So e to the power ikr, again, has some problems of normalizability which have been solved by mathematicians by regarding all these things properly. For physicists, what we say, k is never very definite. It's always a little range, so there is no problem. So with that, we will continue to with the simplified functions. So this is the eigenfunction of this operator given a value. This number does not depend on R. This depends on R. This is the eigenfunction. This is the operator. This is the number. And this number is not restricted. So the momentum eigenspectrum is continuous. You have the so-called delta function normalization. Here, the normalization is this. We still pretend that it is a normalized, and that pretension is called delta function normalization. So then what we do, you take this function, p dash, you take this, use the delta function property, it will give you this, delta of k dash minus. This is orthonormal. Closure, what do? You change the arguments, but keep eigenvalues same, integrate either p or k as the case may be, and this will give you delta of r dash minus. Please check yourself. I mean, these are, you have already done delta functions and Fourier transforms, etc. So these are absolutely straightforward properties to check. And please don't keep bothering about this being norm. I would say for a little while, when you check this property, do not bother, it is not normalized. I mean, don't distract your attention by this. I have told you many times that both the delta function as well as these things have been properly put on a rigorous basis by creating, appropriate wave packets. You can have very large wave packets with very small range k, and all that problem can be fixed. So it's good to keep working with these slightly non-rigorous e to the power ikr. Okay. So I already said momentum eigenfunction. If you are too worried about it, then there are ways to satisfy people who just don't want to accept that there is a thing called normalization in a box with periodic boundary condition. These are all tricks of the physics trade, that you somehow want to get ahead, go ahead and progress in your main subject and not get bogged down by some mathematical difficulties. So one way is, and this is called artifact. Artifact means a kind of machine, a kind of tool in physics to get out of a problem and then concentrate on the physics of it. So if you don't want delta functions, then what you do is you impose this condition, period, that at x equal to 0, it's a box with periodic boundary condition. That is, the function repeats itself. If the function repeats itself, the good thing is the values kx now get discretized. You get discretized because how will I get e to the power ik x, that is 0, and e to the power ik, I mean, kxl should be 2 pi. So 2 pi, any multiple of 2 pi. So kx is this. So, and similarly for z. So k values become discrete. Now you say, you just now said momentum is continuous eigenspectrum. Why are you saying it is discrete? I say, no problem. It is, L is in your hand. You just make L infinite. So it's as good as being continuous, because the spacing between two values is 2 pi L, 2 pi by L. If you, and nobody has said what L. So L tends to infinity, the spacing becomes 0. So it's as good as continuous. So these are the tricks of the trade in quantum mechanics and in physics in general. And these tricks are to if you feel uncomfortable with those delta functions and like Kronecker deltas better because they are discrete, etc., then you can use periodic boundary. It's often useful to keep track of the dimension of the wave function, etc. It's a very useful trick. So then the normalized wave function is 1 upon L3 by 2. Nice. Now no question of anything going to infinity. And over the integral, now you integrate over the box and you get proper Kronecker delta, not delta function. And closure property, however, remains the same because you are not made R. Nobody makes position discrete. That is never done. Momenta you can make discrete for convenience, and at the end of the calculation you take L tending to infinity. So it's just an intermediate tool. Now somebody say, why did you not simply confine it in a box if you had such problems? No, it cannot be confined in a box. Then the uncertainty principle will say it's wrong. So that is why periodic boundary condition. So it still continues to be a momentum eigenfunction. If you confine it in a box, then it will not be an eigenfunction of momentum because of the uncertainty. That is why this trick of periodic boundary condition is used. I will not spend too much time. It's a technical matter. Please look at the slides and try to understand yourself. I will come to the physics of the thing. That is the post. Yeah.
Sir, actually, so yeah, 5 minutes are left and there are some questions. So do you want to take the questions?
Take it back because yeah, I cannot end this lecture without this postulate. Yeah. What are the questions? Hope not about periodic box. That I'll answer only. Nothing about periodic box. Yeah.
So there are related, I mean, not about box specifically, but people are asking, for example, that for a free particle, the wave function does not go to 0 at infinity. So when we do integration by parts, how do we deal with those situations?
Yeah, because for again, you are again coming back to the same free particle wave. It is wrong to say free particle wave function does not go to infinity. It is only one solution. I think you please look at the answer in somebody has said the same thing. A free particle is not normalizable. It doesn't have a norm. That's wrong. Only one solution, namely e to the power ikx kind of solution of a free particle is not normalizable. It's wrong to say free particle function is not normalizable, because if you superpose k only over a small range and make a very, very large extended wave packet, it will be normalizable. So only in the idealized limit of single k, it is not normalizable. You sum it over a little k. So a wave packet, free particle wave packet, please remember, is normalizable. There is no problem of normalizability of a free particle. The problem is only one single wave function, e to the power ikx. That is not normalizable. Please do not get the wrong statement that free particles wave function is not normalizable. Yeah. Okay, I have explained this in the chat answer also. Please look at L4 answers. Yeah.
Okay, so is there any property which needs to be satisfied for a physical quantity to be called as an operator?
It should be linear Hermitian. That's all. It should be a linear Hermitian operator. That's all. Next.
Okay, so one question, maybe you had said it already, but as for a matrix Hermitian conjugate is transpose of a complex, how do we take Hermitian conjugate of an operator A? What does A dagger stands for? Is it same for matrix?
It stands exactly for what the definition is. There is no other deeper meaning except what the definition. I write my first line of the linear Hermitian operator slide. I have defined what it is. What is more there? There's nothing more to it. There's nothing deeper than the definition of that A dagger given already. There's nothing that operator has something, and you don't complex conjugate or transpose yourself. There's no meaning of, complex conjugate of an operator doesn't have any good sense in as an operator in quantum mechanics. And there's no meaning of transpose of an operator. Dagger of an operator is just what I wrote on the first slide. Dagger of a matrix is complex conjugate and transpose. And I'm going to show you in a later lecture that there is, with every operator, there is a matrix. How we will see very shortly. Then the what we call dagger of an operator becomes dagger of that matrix in the matrix sense. Okay. Next question.
Okay, so sir, if you want to go ahead with third postulate, you may. Then we can take up in later.
Yeah. Now, let me say postulate. It's very central and almost obvious, you can say. And extract information about any physical observer. Now, I said psi RT, no matter what it does, it has to be one of the eigenfunction. The reason is psi can be always expanded in terms of this, where AEN is this. So it means psi has, whenever you make measurement, psi has to be in one of these EN. And Cn is kind of sort of a coefficient. So, I mean, I don't have time to ask questions. It is obvious that Cnt mod square is the probability that measurement of A in the state psi RT is in this ENR. And what is the meaning of ENR? It will give you AN as the measurement. So that's all postulate 3 is. So profound, but so simple. Once you understand this energy eigenfunction equation, when it is AN, A operator gives you AN. AN in an energy eigenfunction according to the same postulate, then the AN comes with, definitely it is AN, but psi need not be one of the AN. Psi may be a superposition of them with some coefficients. Those coefficients which are large in magnitude, obviously we will interpret them as to be the ones which are likely to be more there. So Cnt square is the probability that measurement of A in the state psi RT yields the measured value An at time t. So that is all the postulate to use. Simple but very profound and the central postulate of quantum mechanics. Okay, I'll repeat it for another observer. Same procedure applies to extract information about any other physical observer. Let's say, supposing B, then what I'll do then, forget A about A now. Solve this equation, eigenvalue equation of B. You will get some other function, some other eigenvalues. I should have given some other index, maybe sigma. It's not the same n, it's some other thing. Psi RT, DNT, FNR. So what will be the interpretation of DNT? DNT mod square is the probability that measurement of B, not A, measurement of B in the state psi RT yields the measurement of value B at that time. So in this way, probabilistic information about any physical observer can be obtained in a state. And we have answered the question that we started in lecture 3, how to extract information. Probabilistic information. What is the answer? You want to extract information about B? Go and first solve the equation. Before that, don't come to me. Go first solve the equation. Having solved the equation, expand the given state, expand in terms of the, because it's a complete set, and mathematicians have told me that if you're taken a Hermitian operator, it's a complete set. Then physics comes in saying, and DNT mod square will be the probability of getting this eigenvalue on the measurement. Huh?
यार मेरा अपना पढ़ाई भी है, मेरा पेपर है।
ये क्या पढ़ाते हैं?
ये दूसरा सब्जेक्ट पढ़ा।
Please mute your microphone.
Sorry, I'm sorry. There was some noise. Yeah, what is it? Hello.
No, nothing. You can carry on, Professor Kumar. You can carry on.
Okay. Now, supposing it was in degeneracy, it doesn't matter. And because of degeneracy, you expand not only in terms of n, you expand in this. But when you measure AN corresponds to any ENS. So CNS mod square summed over will be the probability of being in any state which gives you AN. So probability of getting AN on measurement of A is going to be CN square mod square. Oh, it should be mod square here. Sorry. I mean, it doesn't matter, but one should write CNS mod square. And the same thing, doesn't matter. summed over S is the probability of this. So degeneracy complication, it is not just Cn mod square, but you have to add up all the probability because An corresponds to En. So CNS is the weightage coefficient for any of these. So CNS mod square will be in one of these. You sum over all of these, all of these will correspond to the eigenvalue An. So therefore, this is the answer for degeneracy. So I'll just finish at this point. I think you have to give me just 5-10 minutes and we'll then break. Imagine, what is exactly measurement? Imagine an infinitely large ensemble of identical quantum systems prepared in the same state psi r at time t. Okay, am I very short of time or can I go for 5-7 minutes? What is your?
We can keep the room going for another 10 minutes, let's say.
Okay, so you give me 10 minutes.
But, yeah, but at that point we'll close. We'll not be able to take further questions.
So, and then the questions can be taken. You please write on the chat the questions because this section has numerous questions, many of which are not even answerable. So let's finish this. How do we view measurement in quantum mechanics? So what you have seen, we are talking of probability. So obviously, when we talk of probability, we have to think of a large number of identical quantum states prepared in the same state psi. Postulate 0 means a state is characterized by psi. So when psi is given, state is given. There is nothing more to it. It's completely specified. So postulate 0 is coming in that statement prepared in the same state psi. Because two identical states, if you are calling them, they will have to have identical psi. So they have been prepared the same. Measurement of observed symbol in general lead to different measure values for different members. Postulate 2, these values belong to the set of eigenvalues of the A or the observer. What did postulate 2 say? Postulate 2 says that supposing these are millions experimenters and they are doing the experiment, each experimenter will have to give a value which will have to be one of these. It can't be anything else. If angular momentum corresponding to is L equal to 0, 1, 2, 3, everybody has to report either 0, 1, 2. There cannot be orbital and half corresponding to half. Clear? So that is the meaning of postulate 2. And what is postulate 3? These reported values will not be common to everybody. Somebody will report one value. That one value will have to be, as per postulate 2, one of the eigenvalues. But which value, the different experimenters will report different values, and therefore you will get a distribution, probability distribution, from which you can get mean value, uncertainty, or whatever you want. So this ensemble will give you the probability distribution. Just one member of the ensemble will give you just one value. You won't know what it is. You can't predict what value it will get. So as you know, if there is a toss which you coin you throw, you don't know what you will get. You have to throw many coins to see the probability, etc. So that is the point. The probability distribution then yields the values. Now, just what constitutes? Now, there are some problems. Measurement of an observable. According to Niels Bohr, measurement of an measurement always involves interaction with suitable classical apparatus that clearly gives out distinct pointers. So it's one of some crazy aspects of quantum mechanics that you need a classical apparatus to interpret what you're talking about. And that classical will give you a definite value. There are no uncertainties. Definite value for a given experiment. He'll report a definite value. So for the observer A being measured in the state, supposing at t equal to 0, some member of the ensemble has reported a measure value C. What does it mean? According to this eigenvalue equation, for that experimenter, just prior to the measurement, the system was in the state psi for every member. For this particular member of the ensemble, the measured value is lambda 3. So its state immediately after the measurement is E3. Clear? His state must be E3. Everybody's state is psi, but the one who got lambda 3, the one who got lambda 5, that state will be E5. The one who got something else, that state will be something else. And we know with what probability it will happen. That we know very sure, according to postulate 3. We don't know which member will give you what, but we know the probability distribution. So that is the thing. But for one particular member, it's a bit mysterious thing. What is happening? It was psi and suddenly it has become ER. This is called wave function collapse. How did it happen? Niels Bohr and his company said, we don't know. It's not our job to know what happens. This is the way it happens. What they say, we know the time-dependent Schrodinger equation governs until measurement. Before measurement, how it was moving. How it was moving after the measurement, how it will be moving, that I know, provided you give me the potential. But there is no equation in quantum mechanics that governs how psi suddenly becomes E3. So this continuous change is beyond quantum mechanics and is one of the big interpretative problems of quantum mechanics, not yet resolved. So Copenhagen interpretation, that is the interpretation of Niels Bohr and his colleagues, is not satisfactory in many ways. Wave function collapse remains unexplained. It seems to require the existence of classical systems to interpret quantum mechanics. Not a happy situation for a theory that aims to replace classical mechanics. I mean, still you have to need classical apparatus to interpret your theory. It's a bad thing, but that's the way it is. It's not clear where to draw the line between a quantum object and a classical object. A related question is a major interaction fundamentally different from other interactions? If so, in what way? And another point is a macroscopic object consists of microscopic constituents. So does it not follow quantum mechanical rules? In particular, atomic state superpositions are so common. We have been talking about it all the time. But why do we never come across superpositions of macroscopic state? Have you ever come across superposition of table being 50% of the time here in the dining room and 50% in the kitchen? Have you ever seen such a state? Why does it not happen if it happens for an atom? So this people have suggested decoherence by environment as one of the popular theories to this. And this paradoxical thing goes behind the very famous thing called Schrodinger cat paradox, which we are not going to do those things. So these various issues are yet to be resolved. The Schrodinger cat paradox, the wave function collapse, all this is called the measurement problem in quantum mechanics and is a subject of research. It's called foundations of quantum theories. And all the brilliant minds in physics, they keep debating about these issues, but so far no clear-cut, universally accepted interpretation has emerged. But please don't take a wrong message from this. The positive message is no interpretation ever challenges the mathematical formalism of quantum mechanics. They are only debating about interpretation. The mathematics of quantum mechanics and the formalism of quantum mechanics and the way of predicting results, scattering cross sections, discrete energies, that is absolutely beyond any debate and is experimentally verified to an astonishing accuracy. So there is no debate. No, don't take a wrong message. Oh, that these are problems. The problems are at the fundamental level. That's why they are called foundations of quantum theory problems. And there are experts, there are in TIFR some experts, and I know some other experts also. You can look at the literature on the internet on these issues, and there is a large amount of literature on this measurement problem and interpretative problems. But my advice to you will be, don't get, you please do read it, it will enlighten you, but don't get swept by this and forget the real, the real content of quantum mechanics. For us, for atomic physics, molecular physics, nuclear physics, particle physics, the working physicists, they have to have a very, very good knowledge of that apparatus of quantum mechanics, the formalism of quantum mechanics that we are doing in this lecture course. So I will not talk about these foundations issues at all. This was just a glimpse of that. Nor am I an expert on this. There are many international experts on this, and you can contact one of them if if you wish. I think there's another section which I'll do in the next lecture, the commuting operators. So I will stop here. I will, as usual, give my references that, and this lecture, actually the slides, many of these were prepared by Amol Dighe, Professor Amol Dighe, who is always here, I think, in these sessions. So, and other useful references as usual. And as usual, I thank my friends for their help and support. Thank you. And I'm through. Yeah. So, hello.
Yes, sir. So probably we are out of time. So then I would request everyone to write their remaining questions in the chat, and
Yeah.
then sir will answer them over Moodle.
Yeah, we'll answer over the Moodle, etc. And tomorrow we'll do that, the remaining section and vector space theory, the mathematics of vector space theory. We'll do that tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.